Vanessa moved in with Joey not as an impulsive leap, but as if she were dragging herself through a door she had long known was wrong, yet could no longer find the way back. Joey's penthouse looked out over all of Fairmont Crest beneath a luxurious wash of golden light, its glass walls reflecting a glossy world where power, money, and reputation merged into a seamless sheen. On the surface, it was a new beginning. Doug's belongings had been removed from sight, family photos replaced by expensive abstract art, and Joey's cologne smothered the familiar sting of antiseptic that Vanessa still associated with the hospital and the old clinic that had once defined her husband's life. Yet every step she took inside that apartment echoed like the steps of someone wandering through a land scrubbed clean of evidence while still hiding stains that had never truly dried. Joey tried to impose a new order on everything, offering Vanessa a private office, arranging a corner for the clinic's free care project drafts, speaking about the future in the tone of a man who believed he was rescuing the woman he loved. But beneath those promises, Vanessa could still hear the whisper of her own conscience with brutal clarity. If Doug was truly dead, then whose arms was she sleeping in, her savior's? Or the arms of someone who had exploited her grief at the most perfectly timed moment? Joey, too, was not at peace inside this victory that seemed so complete. He had pursued Vanessa back when she was still Dr. McBride's wife, had watched Doug spiral into gambling, had used that debt to bind their family, and in the end had turned Doug's death into the ticket that brought Vanessa into Joey's world. On paper, everything was clean. The police ruled it an accident. Doug drunk, speeding, losing control, the car veering off the road. Only Joey knew better than anyone that that night contained more than alcohol and recklessness. It contained a call to Marcel, a cold command delivered in a VIP room at the casino. A choice Joey justified with the thought, if not tonight, then on another night. And yet even a man as confident as Joey in his ability to erase traces never expected the ghost of that decision to follow him into the very space he built for Vanessa. On her first night there, Joey jolted awake in the dark, cold sweat soaking his back, the dream still carved into his mind, Doug standing in the corner of the room, his shirt drenched in blood, saying nothing, only staring at Joey with eyes that held more exhaustion and disappointment than rage. Joey sat up, forcing himself to believe it was merely the ordinary symptom of guilt, that he wasn't some madman haunted by the man he had chosen to remove from the board. But when he turned and saw Vanessa asleep beside him, her hair spilled across the pillow, her arms unconsciously clinging as if trying to hold on to something already lost, he realized the haunting wasn't there to threaten him. It was there to remind him that some forces could not be controlled by power, memory, and the way people are forced to face it. My day, Vanessa buried herself in meetings about the free clinic project, trying to believe she was doing the right thing. The clinic, in name and in public narrative, was the dream Doug used to talk about, a place that would provide medical care for the poor who lived beyond Fairmont Crest's gates. People who could only glimpse the compound through fencing and accepted that they did not belong in that light. Now the project was resurrected with Joey's money, with deals arranged with Samantha and Nicole, with sponsorship from a financial political alliance whose full map Vanessa was never allowed to see. She soothed herself with the idea that whatever the source of the money, the outcome would still be good patients treated. Her name tied not only to luxury real estate ventures but also to a humanitarian work. But each time she signed another document, each time she saw Joey Armstrong beside her own name, Vanessa felt as though she were laying bricks for a new prison cell, without knowing whether she was the guard or the captive. At night, when the noise fell away, the fear she kept chained down during daylight surged back up. What if Doug was still alive? What if the death had only been a performance? Was she being saved from the pain of losing her husband? Or was she being guided into betrayal disguised as love and mercy? Strange dreams began to visit Vanessa not often, but when they came, they left a disorientation that clung to her into the morning. In those dreams, Doug was no longer the exhausted husband undone by gambling whom she had watched in their last years, nor was he the charred body she had sobbed over beside a sealed casket. He appeared in a white lab coat, standing at the entrance of a building that looked eerily like the blueprint of the new clinic, his gaze both accusing and pleading. He never spoke, yet inside her head she heard questions crashing one after another. Whom had she chosen? What had she sold out? Whose dream was she building? And on what kind of death? Vanessa would wake with her heart hammering, her hand reaching for her phone, only to stop halfway as she remembered there was no longer a number for Doug to call, no old house to return to. She would look at Joey and see him sleeping restlessly too, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he were arguing with someone in his own dreams. Some nights, both of them lay awake until dawn without speaking, their backs turned to each other, each drowning in a private version of the truth they were too afraid to say aloud, terrified that the moment it was spoken, everything would shatter like the transparent glass walls enclosing this new life. Meanwhile, outside Fairmont Crest, another undertow was rising. Doug, the man everyone believed dead, was not lying peacefully beneath the grave that had been hastily constructed for him. The accident had been real enough: alcohol, speed, a horrific impact. But Doug had not died the way the world was meant to believe. Dragged from the burning rack by hands he never clearly saw, he woke inside a secret medical facility, kept alive not out of kindness but because of what he was worth: knowledge of falsified ledgers, hidden accounts, money laundering rooted through the public face of community projects. A darker force behind the clinic's shadow funding saw Doug as a card that could be played two ways: silence him forever, or keep him as leverage to force Joey and anyone tied to him to stay in line. Doug chose a third option, harder and more painful: to fake his death and step off the board before someone tightened a noose around his throat. He accepted letting Vanessa and the children believe he was gone, accepted watching from afar as funerals took place, condolences were posted, and headlines moved on, using his own family's grief as a shield for the truth that he was still alive. Months in hiding reshaped Doug in ways even he hadn't anticipated. His love for Vanessa did not disappear, but it became contaminated by something heavier: the feeling of betrayal as he watched her appear beside Joey not only as a partner, but as Joey's woman. At first, Doug clung to the belief that Vanessa was only desperate, that Joey had preyed on her vulnerability, that if Doug could return, things could still be repaired. But the more he monitored the news, the more he listened to recordings from the clinic's planning meetings, the more he was forced to face a brutal truth: Vanessa wasn't only a victim anymore. She had become part of the very system Doug once warned about. She signed murky contracts. She stood beside Joey during promotional photo ops. She smiled into cameras and spoke about the clinic's humanitarian mission, a project Doug knew was being used to cleanse millions of dollars born of gambling, protection rackets, and deals Joey would never admit publicly. Doug's anger wasn't simply anger that Vanessa had moved on. It was anger that she had walked so far into Joey's world that even she could no longer tell salvation from betrayal. The opening day of the free clinic was chosen as Fairmont Crest's golden milestone. The press was invited, politicians lined up to send flowers. Speeches were carefully polished. Everything was designed to proclaim that the wealthy community behind iron gates had finally opened its heart to the world it had always looked at from over its shoulder. Vanessa stood before a mirror in the prep room, adjusting a custom dress, seeing in her reflection not only a successful businesswoman but also a woman who had poured all her grief over her husband's death, her fear of poverty, her terror of being left behind, into the decision to stand beside Joey today. She told herself this was the point of no return. Once she stepped out, every commitment would be stamped in front of the entire city, and she would officially become the face of a project whose interior she still hadn't dared to examine too closely. Joey, meanwhile, stood at the end of the corridor tightening his tie, trying to hide the anxiety gnawing at him from the inside. The leaders of the shadow sponsors had made it plain: the clinic wasn't just a beautiful building for photos. It was a goldmine for legitimizing money, a gateway that would elevate Joey from a kingpin in the dark into a philanthropist the press could praise. Any disruption today could bring everything down. Joey had considered, at least in his head, eliminating the Doug problem once and for all. But the death file, the forensic conclusion, the certificate, everything was flawless. Only one thing hadn't been buried: the sensation that the accident had been too clean, too perfectly timed, too convenient to be mere coincidence. Some nights, when he snapped awake from dreams, Joey couldn't tell whether he feared Doug's ghost returning or feared the possibility Doug had never actually left the board at all. The moment clinic doors opened and applause erupted, guests rising to their feet, Vanessa stepped toward the podium with a practiced smile, Joey beside her like an unshakable pillar. Everything looked so perfect they almost believed in the picture themselves. But then, through the glass at the front, a figure appeared walking slowly, surely, as if every step had been measured, calculated. At first, Vanessa thought exhaustion was playing tricks on her again. But when murmurs began to ripple through the seats, when Nicole's eyes, Samantha's eyes, and the eyes of Fairmont Crest residents all snapped toward the same point, Vanessa had no choice but to look. The man at the threshold was not a ghost, not an illusion. It was Doug, thinner, older, but with the same eyes she had once leaned on when the world spun out of control. In an instant, the room seemed to lose all sound. For Vanessa, time rewound. The afternoon she received news of the crash, the night she cried beside a sealed casket, the first days Joey comforted her, the clinic contracts, the moment she stepped into the penthouse. All of it collapsed into a single question. If Doug had never died, then what had she been living on all this time, and what had she betrayed? Joey felt his blood turn to ice as Doug approached the podium without trembling. This was no longer the drunken man staggering through nights of gambling losses, but someone who had seen the bottom of hell and returned with a purpose sharp enough to cut. Behind Doug stood a stranger who looked like a lawyer or an investigator, gripping a thick folder. Joey understood instantly. This wasn't just psychological warfare. This was a public declaration of war in broad daylight. Doug had come back at the exact moment the ribbon was about to be cut, not to apologize and not to beg, but to announce that he held the real story of the money that built this place. Joey's mind raced through scenarios: deny, attack, destroy Doug's credibility by dragging up his gambling past, or order a second accident before any accusation could land. But this time, everything was more complicated. Doug had chosen to return in front of the press, in front of politicians, in front of the community Joey was trying to enchant with his new image. Killing a man already buried in paperwork was one thing. Dealing with someone who had just walked back from the dead in front of television cameras was an entirely different game. For Vanessa, the collapse was far more chaotic. She saw Doug, yet her mind simultaneously flashed to nights she had leaned on Joey's shoulder to keep herself from breaking, to the times Joey used money to make problems disappear, to contracts he quietly adjusted to shield her from difficult questions. She couldn't simply label Joey a demon and Doug a saint. Both men had claimed protecting Vanessa as the justification for decisions she was never consulted on. Doug faked his death to keep her safe. Joey hid the truth to help her keep living. Now, standing between them, Vanessa realized she had never truly been asked what she wanted, had never been allowed to choose her own path. Her anger no longer aimed in a single direction. It exploded into a storm inside her: anger at Doug for abandoning her inside a false grave, anger at Joey for building an entire new life on that pain, and anger at herself for letting other people's choices carry her so far that she forgot the sound of her own voice. From that moment, the war at Fairmont Crest was no longer merely a confrontation between two men fighting over one woman. It was a battle between layers of truth buried beneath glamour, a question of how long power and reputation could keep masking dark games. Doug seemed to have evidence strong enough to strip away the network of dirty money pouring into the clinic, the calls between Joey and his partners, the agreements with the forces operating behind the compound. Joey held the power to annihilate Doug's reputation with a snap: gambling records, professional lapses, medical notes that could be twisted into something damning. Vanessa stood in the middle, no longer the one being protected, but the only person who could speak the full story without fully belonging to either side. Her choice now wasn't simply which man to choose. It was who she would become, continuing as a supporting character in someone else's version of events, or, for the first time, standing up to redefine her own fate even if it meant shattering everything she had struggled to build from the day Doug died until now. As the noise in the lobby began to rise and camera lenses swung toward Doug, as every gaze bounced from Vanessa to Joey, the air tightened until even a breath could detonate the room. For the first time, Fairmont Crest had to face the possibility that its most horrifying secret was not what had been hidden, but the fact that everyone knew something was wrong and chose to look away. This war could end with the truth exposed, triggering a chain of collapses, or it could end with a second death, this time more horrifying, more calculated. Carried out in a world already too accustomed to turning tragedy into gossip over a glass of wine. Whatever the outcome, one thing had become irreversible. Vanessa could no longer live the way she had before. Saved or betrayed, loved or used, she would have to stand in the eye of the storm and answer not only for Doug, not only for Joey, but for the one person everyone kept claiming they acted for without ever truly asking, herself.